Welcome to another episode of the Mind Takeaway podcast.
Welcome.
In this episode, we wanted to explore how you can plan for success. Funny enough, we're just off the back of doing some planning for ourselves. In Southwest France, we've just done a leadership retreat of late. And then we were like, okay, we need to practice what we preach. So let's take a good chunk of time out and let's get excited. Let's get a bit strategic. Let's plan ahead. Let's see what we can do. But also to have nothing on, trying to have a very tight control over what's going to happen in the future, because quite often if we stifle what we see as success, we might get successful, but quite often when we've set goals with clarity, we've realized that there has to be a fair amount of wiggle room, because sometimes you get what you can get surprises. You can actually get more than what you bargained for, which is great. And yes, sometimes goals aren't achieved, or some of the amazing things that you set out to do with your business might not happen because of timing, because of the market, because of technology, because of the weather, whatever it is. So how do you plan for success, Mira? What would you say? Let's explore the kind of steps you would take if you were going off and doing planning with your team, with your founders. Or if you're a bigger company, it could be a leadership team, or it could be your department or function. So what would happen is there anything you would do before?
Yeah, and it's exactly what we are doing right now. We are walking in nature, surrounded by birds and bush, and we are walking, we are not static. What often happens and we found that this works for us. It's to get ourselves in the best state of mind and body when we are doing these things, because our physical and mental states affects the way we think and quality of ideas that we come up with and how we see the future. When we are in stressful environment, when we are stressed, when there's lots of stuff going on, when there's lots of distractions going on, it is really hard to get out of that vicious circle of doing the same thing over and over again and coming into an open space, into unknown, but without fear, and exploring. So what I would suggest is do whatever you need to do in order for all of you to be in the best and optimal physical and mental state when you do these kinds of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we're not saying that you must be in nature, but actually in terms of curiosity and creativity, if you don't want to stifle it, even a change of scenery, even if you can't leave the office, a different room would be better. But what we're saying is if you really want to plan for success, then it's to plan it in the future and to hopefully do it off-site if you can. And if you've got budgetary concerns or you can't spend money in the short term, we've got your back here. We're not saying you should spend money. We're actually saying that this can be done without any extra spend. It's just a matter of planning it right and getting creative. So for example, we've worked with smaller companies where, understandably, they haven't got the budget to spend on some swanky offsite for 3 days, and that's fair enough. But what we're saying is that you could take the whole team to the local park next to where your office is,
Go for a hike.
Yeah, you could go to your local woods or go for a hike. So if I talk about Berlin, for example, Berlin's got a lot of woods and lakes and stuff like that. So with little spend, you can take your teams out for a few hours into somewhere that's completely different from that stifling space in the office. Because if I'm honest, I've been lucky and been quite privileged to work in some fantastic state-of-the-art facilities in my career. However, that still got in the way because you end up getting spoiled. It becomes the same. You get normalized by your environment. So just that simple thing of changing it, switching it up, going into a different space is wonderful for curiosity, innovation, and creativity. And then you might actually go off, do an activity with your team that might seem like a bit frivolous because you might have a bit of fun and do some team building. But this is exactly what we're saying works, because you go off and you do some event where your team get comfortable with each other. It opens up the door for collaboration and people will just get more comfortable. And then what happens is when you've done those early stage things, and it could be like, okay, let's just get excited and prepare ourselves for getting strategy, being strategic, planning what we're going to do in the next 6 months to a year. And then when you need to do the documentation and be a bit more scientific, that can be done back in the office, not a problem. But the initial stages are, let's get your creative juices flowing. Let's get you all as a team curious. That's what you're doing. And honestly, walking around the woods, being in nature, getting a bit of fresh air, if that's possible for where you are, where you live, then it couldn't be a better start. Because the amount of times when I've worked for companies where we're stuck in a room and it's almost like the door's locked. I mean, metaphorically, no one's going to lock the doors. Hopefully they won't. But where there's a pressure from, the leader in the room, like, look, we're not leaving until we get some results. It might work now and again, but quite often that won't give you the kind of excitement and the results you want to be able to really plan what are we going to do with our products? What are we going to do that's going to help us stay ahead of our competitors and be a market leader, a torchbearer in our industry? It's less likely to happen if you've been forced to stay in a room. Whereas if you can be flexible and, okay, let's get excited team, let's take a day out in a few weeks. But in that gap of those 2 weeks, or how much notice you give for said planning, you can get your team, you can set them to do some pre-work. And the pre-work could be, let's have no control on it, but where would we like to be? And if you're the boss, it's like, okay, put some structure around it. What are we going to do in the next 3 to 6 months? What are the kind of things that the company wants to focus on and what's important for your team? And if you prime your team with those things and then you go off into the park, into the woods, and you do an activity, it might look like you're wasting time, but actually this is all good in return on investment. That time invested walking around, getting creative and thinking about what if will absolutely accelerate and get you to hit the ground running when you go back in. And then, for example, talk us through, Mira. So if you can talk us through how you document our planning, maybe that would help. So once we've done this, we've been out in nature, we've had a good chat about what we plan to do, and we might have took some notes. Sometimes we'll make voice notes. We'll have a a small notebook with us. Sometimes we'll write it on an iPad, whatever. But what's the next step? So once we've done that and we've got creative and we've been out and about and we've enjoyed the environment, what would be the next stage?
Well, the next stage is sitting down and putting that, documenting what came up and putting more structure to it. So, what out of these things we would like to continue doing, what of the things that we don't want to continue doing. How do we want to feel? How do we want to collaborate? Because the biggest thing of any company's success is the relationship of the people that are part of the company and the way they collaborate, how they help each other, how they have each other's back. And all of that is actually done in that period of you walking around together, talking about stuff. Normally you have somebody with you that is going to guide you through the process, asking questions, getting curious about it. And so that connection that it's created between you is something that is going to stay afterwards as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You don't have to, again, if you've got a challenge with how much money you can spend on these things, because that can be a thing. That's not a problem. You can assign someone in your team to be able to facilitate that if that's possible, or maybe it's someone outside your team with a bit more experience. But if you've got the luxury of being able to bring someone external in, then yeah, that's critical stage when you've collected all of the ideas and you've got excited, it's always good to have someone to facilitate getting it on a whiteboard, however you want to do it, and then getting those options clear so then you can refine all of those wonderful ideas down to where things are realistic. You know, could we implement some of these things? Is there a cost implication? You know, what are the challenges what are the challenges if one of these things actually doesn't work? Would that actually blindside us? Would it knock us off kilter? Would it have a impact on the team itself? Could we just learn from that and see it as a beta test, or is it something we can just crack on with, you know?
Yeah, and one of the big things in strategy planning is what can get in the way and how can we mitigate those challenges? What can we do in order to prevent them or lessen the impact? And also, how do we want to work together?
Yeah, that's a good one, because quite often when we've done strategy with leadership teams for some of the world's, you could say, arguably successful brands and biggest companies, what we found is that when the team works on what could get in the way of us working to achieve these goals, then it's more likely that these things, if you agree that that's going to be something to focus on for the next 3 to 6 months, then you're more likely to achieve that and come together and collaborate. So if you've got stuff down and you've got someone facilitating, what's the next stage? What happens? So the next stage, after documenting everything, you've refined it down, it's really deciding on what's the most important things, and also just realizing that goal setting, the importance of it, and we've covered this in other episodes, so we won't go too deep into it, but it's not I'll be happy when goal. You know, I'll be happy when our team does this or the company does this. It's like, okay, we've got clarity, we've been creative, we've been collaborating, we've all agreed that this is something that's important to us. It looks like it's going to be important. It's going to make all the difference for our company. So then it's time to just put the structure around what that would look like. And the biggest thing, which again might seem obvious, but it's like, who's in charge of that? Who's responsible for it? How are you going to measure if that goal is successful? And also, crucially, like we talked about before, you can change your mind. You know, quite often with our business, we've set some clear goals and we were excited about them and it made sense. But 3 months later, we both agreed that actually this isn't so important right now. And just by being open to the possibility of what was around the corner, what we can't see, the possibility of other opportunities, we've realized that we actually don't want to do said goal. And that's okay, because we all have to have that learning. You know, quite often what we've seen companies making huge mistakes with, and there's a huge cost implication, is we set this goal, so therefore we are going to achieve it regardless. And that's kind of blindsiding yourself, because sometimes with the data you have, with all the technology in the world, you know, unfortunately we don't have a crystal ball. So some of the things you might have set out as a team with clarity, with other data, you might have done a beta test and found out actually it doesn't make sense. And it's okay, because that learning is going to give you something else. So it's okay to park that stuff, and that frees you up to focus on what's really important. So yeah, I hope that's been useful, because we can't obviously go into too much detail, because that would be like basically an episode about a whole strategy session. But what we're trying to get you excited about and curious about is how to get that started, how to hit the ground running when you want to do something creative and get strategic with your team. That ultimately, like we said, just to conclude, it's about changing your environment, getting comfortable with each other to collaborate, and then documenting what comes out of your head.
Yeah, and also you can use this, what we were just talking about, to work on more specific things. You know, we were talking about strategy, and you will do strategy once a year, maybe once every 6 months, depends of in what stage of development your company is. But you can do this for projects, you know, the team that works on one project. You can do this for innovation. You can do this for many different things where you need deep, focused work, good collaboration between people, and many different and wonderful ideas.
So yeah, if this gets you curious and piques your interest or gets you out and about in the woods or the park, or, you end up taking your team to a venue to kind of kickstart things, let us know how it goes. We'd be really curious to hear what happened. So yeah, thanks for listening as always.
And let us know if you have any questions.
Bye.
Bye.